My name is Olivia Carter, and I grew up in Bellevue, Washington, just outside Seattle. For most of my childhood, life felt perfect. My father, Daniel Carter, owned a successful residential construction company, and our beautiful lakefront home overlooked Lake Washington. My mom was the heart of our family, filling every room with warmth and laughter. Everything changed the year I turned 10. My mother lost her battle with cancer. The house that had once been filled with love suddenly became painfully quiet. A year later, my father married Rebecca Hayes. At first, Rebecca seemed kind. She bought me birthday presents, helped me with homework, and constantly told my father how lucky she felt to have me as a daughter. But the moment my father left for work every morning, she became a completely different person. "You'll never be my real daughter," she would whisper whenever we were alone. I kept those words to myself because I didn't want my father to believe he had made another terrible mistake after losing my mother. 2 years later, Rebecca gave birth to a son named Logan. From that day on, I stopped feeling like part of the family. Every holiday revolved around Logan. Every expensive gift belonged to Logan. Every family photo slowly pushed me farther toward the edge until it felt like I didn't belong in them anymore. My father was constantly traveling for work, trying to expand the company across the West Coast. He had no idea what life inside our home had become. Then, tragedy struck again. While flying to a construction conference in Denver, Colorado, my father's private plane crashed during a severe storm. There were no survivors. The funeral was a blur. Hundreds of people came to honor the man who had built homes for so many families. I could barely stand. I had just lost the only person who had always believed in me. After the funeral, Rebecca changed almost overnight. She took control of every bank account, every legal document, and every decision involving the estate. Whenever I asked questions, she had the same answer. "Your father left everything exactly the way he wanted." I wanted to believe her. I had no reason not to. 3 months later, on the morning of my 18th birthday, I walked downstairs expecting nothing more than an ordinary day. Instead, I found 2 suitcases sitting beside the front door. Rebecca was calmly drinking coffee in the kitchen. Without even looking up, she said, "Happy birthday, Olivia." I stared at the suitcases. "What are those?" "They're yours." My heart began pounding. "What do you mean?" She slid an envelope across the kitchen counter. Inside was $300 in cash. "You're an adult now," she said coldly. "It's time to learn how the real world works." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You're kicking me out? This house belongs to me and Logan now. My dad would never allow this." Rebecca laughed. "Your father isn't here anymore." I looked toward Logan, hoping, just once, he would speak up. Instead, he lowered his eyes and walked out of the room without saying a word. At that moment, I realized I was completely alone. I picked up my suitcases, stepped onto the front porch, and looked back at the only home I had ever known. Tears filled my eyes. But before I walked away, I made myself one promise. One day, I'll come back, not as the frightened girl you forced out of this house, but the woman who owns it. I had no money, no family, no place to go, but I still had something Rebecca could never take from me: my determination. And neither of us knew that the day she threw me out would become the biggest mistake of her entire life. The first night after Rebecca threw me out, I slept in the back seat of my old Honda Civic outside a 24-hour grocery store in Seattle. I cried until I had no tears left. But the next morning, I looked at myself in the rearview mirror and made a decision. I would never let that be my life again. Within days, I found a job as a waitress at a small family diner in downtown Seattle. During the evenings, I cleaned office buildings to earn extra money. Every dollar mattered. There were nights when I survived on instant noodles because I couldn't afford a proper meal. There were winters when I worked 18-hour days just to pay rent for a tiny studio apartment. Whenever life became unbearable, I remembered Rebecca's words, "You're on your own now." Instead of breaking me, those words became my motivation. Over the next several years, I attended night classes at a community college, studying business management and real estate finance. I graduated with honors. Soon afterward, I accepted an entry-level position with a real estate investment company in Bellevue. That's where I met Jack Anderson, a senior project manager who recognized something others overlooked. "You don't think like an employee," Jack told me one afternoon. "You think like an owner." His words changed everything. 2 years later, Jack and I founded Carter Restoration Group, a company specializing in restoring neglected historic homes throughout Washington state. We started with one small truck, 3 employees, and a modest bank loan. The first year was difficult. The second year was better. By the 5th year, developers across the Pacific Northwest were competing to work with us. 10 years after leaving my childhood home, Carter Restoration Group had become one of Seattle's fastest-growing property development companies. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just financially secure, I was free. One rainy Monday morning, my real estate broker, Sophia Bennett, walked into my office carrying a thick property file. "You'll want to see this one," she said. I barely looked up from my laptop. "Another waterfront estate?" She smiled. "Not exactly." She placed the file on my desk. The address instantly caught my attention. 2147 Evergreen Ridge Drive, Bellevue, Washington. My heart skipped a beat. It couldn't be. I opened the file completely. There it was. A photograph of my childhood home, the white brick exterior, the blue front door my father had painted himself, even the maple tree we planted together when I was 8 years old. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Sophia looked confused. "You know this house?" I nodded slowly. "I grew up there." She sat down. "The owners are in serious financial trouble. They're facing foreclosure after several failed investments. If someone doesn't purchase the property within the next few weeks, the bank will take possession." I swallowed hard. "Who's selling it?" Sophia glanced at the paperwork. Rebecca Hayes. Hearing her name after all those years brought every painful memory rushing back. The cold mornings, the insults, the suitcases by the front door, the day she erased me from her life. Sophia quietly asked, "Do you want me to negotiate a lower price?" I looked once more at the photograph. This wasn't just another investment. It was the place where my father had taught me to ride a bicycle, the kitchen where my mother baked birthday cakes, the porch where I promised myself I would one day return. I closed the file. "No." Sophia looked surprised. "No?" I smiled for the first time that morning. "Offer the full asking price." She blinked. "Without negotiations?" "Without negotiations." As she left my office, I stood by the window overlooking downtown Seattle. Exactly 10 years earlier, I had walked away from that house with 2 suitcases and $300. Now I was buying it back with my own success. But deep inside, I had a feeling this wasn't the end of my journey. Something inside that house had been waiting for me all along, and I was about to discover a truth that would change everything I believed about my father's final days. 2 weeks after the closing, I stood in front of 2147 Evergreen Ridge Drive, Bellevue, Washington, holding the keys to the house I had once called home. 10 years earlier, I had walked out of that same front door with 2 suitcases and $300. Today, I walked back in as the legal owner. I slowly unlocked the front door. The familiar scent of old wood and fresh paint filled the air. Every room brought back memories of my childhood, birthday parties, Christmas mornings, and quiet evenings with my parents. Then I heard footsteps. Rebecca Hayes slowly walked down the staircase. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, she whispered, "Olivia." I calmly placed the keys on the kitchen counter. "Hello, Rebecca." She looked around the house before asking the question she already knew the answer to. You bought the house? Yes. She lowered her head. I never thought this day would come. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel anger. I simply felt peace. Rebecca looked exhausted. The confident woman who had once controlled everything was gone. In her place stood someone defeated by the consequences of her own choices. She quietly asked, "Would you give me a few more weeks? I don't have anywhere else to go." I looked around the house she had once claimed would never belong to me again. Then I answered, "You'll have 30 days." She stared in disbelief. "You mean you're not throwing me out today?" I shook my head. "No, I won't become the person you were." Tears filled her eyes. Perhaps she expected revenge. Instead, she received something much harder to live with: compassion. 3 weeks later, my attorney called. "Olivia, we found something while clearing the attic." When I arrived, he handed me a small wooden box covered in dust. Inside were my father's journal, several family photographs, and a sealed envelope with my name written in my father's handwriting. With shaking hands, I opened it. "My dearest Olivia, if you're reading this, it means you found your way home. I always believed your greatest strength would never be money or this house. It would be your character. If this home ever belongs to you again, don't let it become a monument to pain. Let it become a place where hope begins for someone else. I will always be proud of you. Love, Dad." I couldn't hold back my tears. My attorney then showed me another document hidden beneath the journal. It was my father's original estate plan. Years earlier, Rebecca had concealed important documents during the probate process to gain control of the property. But before any legal action became necessary, another surprise changed everything. A few days later, local news stations reported that Rebecca was under investigation for financial fraud connected to several failed real estate investments she had made years after my father's death. The investigators discovered forged financial statements and illegal investment practices unrelated to me. Her own decisions had finally caught up with her. I didn't need revenge. Life had already delivered justice. Several months later, I completely restored my childhood home, but I made one final decision that surprised everyone. Instead of living there alone or selling it for millions of dollars, I donated the property to establish the Carter House Foundation. The home became a safe place for young adults who had been abandoned by their families and needed support while attending college or starting their careers. On opening day, reporters gathered outside the front porch. One journalist asked, "Ms. Carter, if Rebecca Hayes were standing here today, what would you say to her?" I smiled as I looked at the front door. I would thank her. The crowd fell silent. Because the day she forced me out of this house, she unknowingly pushed me towards the life I was always meant to build. A gentle breeze moved through the maple tree my father and I had planted years ago. For the first time in over a decade, I felt completely free. As the ceremony ended, I placed a bronze plaque beside the front entrance. It read, "Carter House, built on courage, restored by hope." I took one last look at the house. Then I smiled, because I finally understood something my father had tried to teach me long ago. The greatest revenge isn't destroying the people who hurt you. It's building a life so meaningful that their cruelty becomes nothing more than a forgotten chapter in your success story.